Hello, and thank you for coming to another episode of Inside the Photographer Studio. My name is Oliver Powell. Today, I'm wanting to do another lesson on some principles of photography. Last lesson, I talked about the shutter speed and how faster or slower shutter speed can affect the outcome of an image that will give you the desired effect you're looking for. We used a water flowing over rocks. The rocks were standing still and the water was flowing over them. So fast shutter speed, I was able to capture individual water droplets. You could see that um, you could see that detail there. And with a slower shutter speed, you're able to use to get the motion of it in a different way. You could actually see how it was moving, and the rocks were standing still, obviously, and they were sharp and crisp and in focus. Now, as you can probably see, we're talking about apertures, or specifically depth of field. Now, what the depth of field is the distance of focus of the subject. So, between the front of the subject and behind it. And how you achieve the depth of field is two main ways. Is you have apertures. So this is your what we call an f stop. Is f1.4 in this diagram, and I found this on Google. It's an image. It says it comes from Tech Radar. So, I just did a Google search and pulled it up. This is just a diagram that someone else made that I'm using for my demonstration purposes. So you have f1.4, f2, f2.8, f4, f8, f16, f22. And f-stops, depending on lenses and manufacturers, they are slightly different, but usually I've seen f2, f2.8, f4. My lens I have for my camera has a maximum aperture of 3.5 to 5.6, which that means that as I zoom out, the maximum aperture will change. So if I zoom out past a certain point, that maximum aperture is at 5.6. So bigger than this, but smaller than that. So I have another lens that's a fixed aperture f2. It's damaged. I have to repair it somehow. And then I can use that lens, and that means that it's, no matter how far out I zoom, it stays at f2. I don't want to get into too complicated, so I just wanted to show you quickly different examples of depth of field. So that's the mechanics behind it. So basically, the larger the aperture, the more light comes in, and the shallower depth of field. And there's two things that go on here: is your focal length and aperture. That what basically controls the depth of field. As you see that as the numbers gets larger, 16, 22, the opening of your aperture gets smaller. Now that also, you could use that if you need a very bright situation, like shooting outdoors in direct sunlight. That's when you might need to use a smaller aperture to let in less light, but then you have to realize that that's going to change your depth of field. So I'll show you an example of a shallow depth of field. This was a picture I took of a trillium. It was growing outside my house. And if I can bring up the information of this particular image, but you will see I was using f5.6, but also I zoomed in with my lens, and I made a shallow depth of field by 5.6, and also I zoomed in and also got really close to the trillium. And you can see the result is zoom in a little bit more. You can see that the inside of the flower, I don't know what those are called, where the pollen is, that is very sharp and crisp in focus. And then you can see the depth of field will change because this part of the petal is significantly closer to the lens. You can zoom out so you can see. So with your depth of field, it will blur the background. If you're using a shallow depth of field. And like I said, you need a bigger aperture and also the focal length of the lens. So there's two ways of getting that desired effect. You zoom in, and also you have a larger depth. This is the information of the exposure. As you can see here, my shutter speed is 1/1000th of a second, so it's a very fast shutter speed. My f-stop is f6, so it's as open as I can get it. My ISO is 200 because if we were using a very, it was a very bright sunny day that day, so we don't need to have a very light sensitive setting. And then I had it set on Aperture Priority, which means that I set it for f5.6, and the camera did the rest of the work. It was able to control the shutter speed to get the desired effect. So, and there's nothing wrong with using your camera's built-in settings. I did that all the time, and I still do in my life now, and when I was a student of journalism at Loyalist. So there's the one image I wanted to show you, and in a contrast, we'll go to a large depth of field. Let's see if I can bring this up a little bit more. So large depth of field will give you a sharp, crisp background. You use a smaller aperture and also the different focal length of your lens. So, and I'll bring up the information of this photo in a moment, but this is use f8 or higher. So now we'll bring up the actual image itself, and you go file and file info. As you can see here, its exposure was what is that, 1250th of a second, f6 again. And you might be saying, well, Oliver, you just said earlier that you need to use f8 or higher, and 5.6 is the biggest aperture my lens will get, but you see that I've zoomed out 29 millimeters, which is fairly wide. You can see from most of it from left to right. It's a fairly wide angle, and because that's what I was going for. I was trying to put Sherry in the center. I was trying to get the reflections of the water and the color and everything. That's how I was able to obtain a large depth of field by backing away from the subject and also having a wider focal length. So now, to wrap this video up, let's do some color correcting just to bring out what's already here. So let's see. That's just brightness and contrast now. I always like to start with levels. Let's just play around with. Now we might have to do kind of like the silhouette look, because if we go this way, all that color's lost, but you can see Sherry, and it looks like she has like a coffee cup or something in the kayak. But if we go down to here, we see all that color, and you wash out the sky, and you go from daytime to evening. So I think I would let's do that. Maybe there. Now curves. And just like that. Fine. Exposure, relief alone, hue and saturation. Now I want to start off with some reds, because there's some reds up here. So let's just there. Not too much, because if we go too much, it's going to look awful. We don't want to get rid of it. We just want just a little bit. Like so. Now some blues. Emphasize. See again. Get rid of them. Too much. Want that Goldilocks zone. Right around there. And let's see what else. We don't want a color balance, because I think the temperature's just fine. I don't want to make it black and white. I think I'll leave the rest of those alone. Now there's a couple more things I want to do. I noticed before I recorded this that we have I don't know what that is. Piece of dust on the lens or something like that. So we'll zoom in a little bit more.
I think it's more useful for if you have a. I think that's all right. The smudge tool seems to be pulling this around this way and that way. It looks more
natural. I don't know. I think the easiest thing if you're not happy with something is you could just crop it out. I don't want. Wait, just the crop tool. There we go. There, that's the easy way to get rid of that is just to crop it out. So, all that, yeah, I think it looks a little bit better. So, you know, I mean, sometimes things don't go your plan. I need more practice with my clone stamp. Yeah. So the quick way of getting rid of a smudge or something on lens or dust is just to crop it out. And you can probably hear my daughter laughing in the background. So I think we'll call this a day. Lots of editing for me to do. So thank you so much for watching. I hope this was informative for you. And I hope you enjoyed this. So have yourself a nice evening. And I'll see you in the next video. Bye.